So in this video, I'm going to talk about the rebuild of this 1994 Zodiac Hurricane 733. So first of all, a little bit of information about the Zodiac Hurricane. These boats are built in British Columbia to a very high standard. These are military grade boats. They're not civilian boats like the Pro or anything like that. These were actually the ones that were built for the military. This particular boat, when I bought it, had a placard on it that said DSATA, so that's Department of State Anti-Terrorism Assistance. So this was a military boat. I bought it directly from the contractor, and that's part of the allure of the Zodiac Hurricane to me, is that it's a very heavy-duty boat. It's very seaworthy. It has a very deep V hull, 24-degree dead rise. You could see this stainless steel beach shoe on the front. And it's really meant to take a beating, and it's built to a very high standard. It has really all of the characteristics that I'm looking for in an adventure boat. So another thing that's notable about the 733 is that I believe it's the smallest motorboat to ever circumnavigate the world. So there was a 733, I think it was called Sunrider, that actually had an inboard diesel, and it actually went around the world. Not that I'm going to try to accomplish that in this boat, but just stories like that make me even more excited about this 733. But let me first talk a little bit about my design philosophy, about how I wanted to build this boat. So my background is not so much in boats, but more in vehicles. My company is called North America Overland, and over the last 20 years or so, I've taken vehicles to the far corners of the continent, and the whole point of overlanding is to go really far out into the wilderness, drive really long distances, and be self-sufficient. And I wanted to apply a little bit about what I love about overlanding to boats. So this rib is basically the boat equivalent of an overland vehicle. It has excellent capability in heavy seas. It has an amazing payload to carry more than enough gas to get pretty much anywhere you need to go. And with the new console and suspension seats, it'll have excellent ergonomics so that you can travel long distances over rough water without beating yourself up too bad. All of the same characteristics that an overland vehicle has. So I also do want to preface this and say that I am not the most experienced boater out there. I'm actually still fairly new to boats, but I am very experienced with doing restorations on cars. And essentially my shop has done 60 full restorations on cars, and I have applied all of that knowledge, skills, and tools to doing the rebuild on this 733. So it was a little bit of a learning curve to gain a better understanding of how boats are rigged and wired and how everything works, but it wasn't as difficult as if I was starting from scratch. So on boats I had in the past, the limitation was never really the hull or the outboard. It was always the comfort and ergonomics. So in other words, how much slamming my back could take and how uncomfortable the boat was to drive for really long periods of time. So I wanted to address those shortcomings with this Hurricane build. So that meant changing up the console and seating. And to solve these problems, I went with a Swedish company called Ullman. So they designed suspension seats for modern military boats and an ergonomic console that's designed to work with their suspension jockey seats. Before I even bought the boat, I knew I was going to go with these Ullman products, and I was really excited to build an adventure boat that was capable of going out on really long distance trips. We did a full teardown on the boat. So we removed the tubes, we stripped out the console, all of the rigging, the gas tanks came out, we got it down just to the bare hull.
Wow.
And from there we began cleaning. This boat was really dirty. It took a lot of scrubbing and power washing to get this hull clean. We then cleaned and buffed the entire hull, and we checked it over for cracks and damage, and it was in really actually very good condition. The original gray gel coat buffed out pretty nice. So although the gel coat cleaned up really nice, we did have to refinish a few components like this outboard extension pod in the back here. So the lower bolts that hold the outboard extension pod on were all removed and replaced with new ones because I was a little bit worried that the salt water would eat away the stainless from sitting inside it, or the bolts would be stretched, and those were all replaced and retorqued to the proper torque. So after we got the hull all buffed out, we installed some new tubes, which are quite pricey from Zodiac MilPro. These are still military grade tubes with some French-made valves, really robust valves.
So guys, how easy is this?
Not easy at all.
Is it harder or easier than you thought?
Harder.
Yeah.
Harder.
So once we got the hull back to the point where it looked pretty good, we began reassembling it. So once the tanks were cleaned, we let some alcohol sit in there to dissolve the old varnish, and then power washed them, cleaned them out, added new fuel pickups, new anti-siphon valves, new sending units, and any of the barb fittings that were corroded were replaced. We dropped the gas tanks back in with some new neoprene strips. So after the gas tanks went in, we replaced all the hoses with the correct Coast Guard approved rubber hose. The fill hoses were double clamped. I also upgraded the fuel filters to some really nice Raycor units, and I even went with some nicer Yamaha primer bulbs that have aluminum fittings instead of plastic. For outboards, I went with some Yamaha 150s. So the boat had some 150 Optimaxes on it before, but I wanted to go for a reliable and well-proven motor. So these Yamahas were perfect for that. So I mentioned before I went with this Ullman console. I wanted to set the console back quite a bit from where the original military console was, which was basically the original console was up front here. So the further back in the boat, the better the ride, but I didn't want to go too far back because I didn't want to obscure visibility over the bow. So I went about right in the middle with the console, and I ordered some throttle cables and a rigging kit for the Yamahas. Steering hoses, I actually went with twin hydraulic cylinders instead of one, so you have a little bit lighter steering with two. That's really the only advantage of it. There's no real redundancy. The rigging holes in the hull did need to be enlarged, so the Optimax had much less rigging than a Yamaha with the whole command link and all that, so I did use two hole saws combined together to drill out the rigging holes slightly larger, which was tricky. And I also learned during that time that the transom has a sandwich of fiberglass inside. So it's fiberglass, like 1 inch thick plywood, more fiberglass, another layer of 1 inch thick plywood, and then another layer of fiberglass. So super heavy duty. So I began routing all the cables. One of the changes I made was instead of using cable clamps, I simply used 1/4 inch zip tie holders, and I actually put a PVC tube in there to run all the rigging through so that I could pull it through easily, even when the console was on. So when the console arrived, it was a completely blank slate, and there is quite a bit of thought that went into this console to make it work well with the seats. So there are some pretty important parameters to consider when building out this console. So first of all, the width between the seats is specified at 600 millimeters, and the offset of the helm is 70 millimeters. So this, you can see the steering wheel is offset 70 millimeters. So when you're sitting on the jockey seat, your both arms are basically even. Your knees are placed 250 millimeters from the console, which is why you have this inset here. And that allows your elbows to be in a nice bent position. So knowing that, I just centered the chart plotters on the seats and placed all of the switches in the center. This is actually the original Hurricane switch plate, but I installed all new switches and new wiring, and I did rewire it with the same color wires as the original Hurricane would have had. And I did carry over some of the components from the original Hurricane. For example, it uses these really robust guest battery switches, so I simply replaced those with some new ones of the same type. So the excellent ergonomics of the Ullman console should really help to reduce fatigue. And another feature that I actually really liked is this inverted windshield. So when you're doing, say, 35 knots, the air is coming off this and actually creating a bubble right over the driver's eye line, which is right here. So if you stand up in the seat, you're blasted with wind. When you're sitting down, you're in this much more calm bubble of air. So I actually really appreciated that part of the design of this console. The console's bolted down to the hull with some hardware that's very similar to the original used on the military console. These are basically just oversized threaded inserts, but they're really difficult to find. I actually could only find them at a place in France and the website was only in French, and I really had to do some translation to make sure I was ordering the right thing. But I ordered enough to do the console and the seat, and they work really, really well. So one change to my original plans was adding this T-top. And originally I did not want to have a T-top on here. I wanted perfect visibility with nothing in my line of sight, and to have just a radar arch in the back, kind of like the Hurricanes had originally. But after a few trips out, I decided that the T-top would probably be a good thing to have. And that's also where I mounted the Garmin radome and the Shakespeare antenna, and also an LED anchor light and an LED spreader light. And for the navigation light, I actually added it to the tow post in the front, just because the wiring was actually very convenient to run to the tow post. And the wiring that was run to the T-top was actually run through the hull and then up into the T-top. And it did involve cutting off the fitting on the Garmin radome Cat 6 cable and crimping on a new fitting after it was rigged through the T-top tubes. And you could see a new Momo steering wheel, just like the Zodiac Hurricanes came with from the factory. So we'll take a quick peek in the console, and I have these stainless steel latches, and I actually made it so the cover would lift out, because if I had hinges, I wouldn't really be able to access it. It would only open that much, and that would be in the way. So this way you can completely remove it. And I have some Odyssey batteries, and you can see there's the wiring for the switches going to a bus bar and terminal block right under here. And I placed them here instead of in the front, just because I wanted to be able to drill some countersunk machine screws here and not have to drill anything in the front. And I didn't want to use I didn't want to either glass in some plywood or use the glue-on fittings on the front. I also found that it's very easy to work on the electrical in this area, because I can actually sit inside the console with my head up there with a headlamp on and work on it, rather than kneeling down and working on it behind the batteries. So I think that was actually a good solution. One thing that was difficult with the rigging was getting all the cable lengths just right. So in the Yamaha rigging kit, the 12-pin harness that comes with it is like 30 feet long, and it's just way too long. And there aren't a whole lot of different sizes, but by careful measuring and trial and error, I was really able to find the perfect length harness for the outboards. The battery cables I made from 2-gauge tinned copper battery cable, so that was easy. I was able to cut that to length. The command link cables went from the outboards to a hub. Then from there, one cable went to the console, and then another hub. And then from there, it went to the 6YC gauge, and then also to an adapter to go to the NEMA 2000, so that all of the inputs from the outboards will show up on the chart plotters. And the only thing I really added to the outboards was a water pressure sensor, so that the water pressure would show up on the gauges. So usually I have the port side screen will have the gauges, and then the other screen will have, for the navigator, will have all of the charts. So I feel like that's a really good combo. And then on the 6YC gauge, I usually just have the fuel level. So speaking of fuel, I did do a test run from Milford to Sag Harbor and back, which is around 150 miles, and also a test run from Milford to Norwich and back, which is also around 150 miles. And each time the boat got around 2.5 miles per gallon, and that's not nautical miles, just regular miles. And I think the fuel burn rate was around 17 gallons an hour at around 38-40 miles an hour in 1-foot seas. So that pretty much sums up the rebuild of this 733. A boat like this is perfect for going out to Block Island or Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard or down to the coast of New Jersey. So with this extremely capable boat with excellent ergonomics and 130 gallons of gas, really the options are limitless.